Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. My name is Maya Crawford-Gray. I am a League member and your host for today. Each week we will talk about issues important for elections. We hope to inspire you to talk about those issues with others. And when election time comes around, we want to help you be ready and willing to go vote. Today our guest is Kelsey Arends, and she's Director of Operations and Special Programs with Nebraskans for Civic Reform. Hi, Kelsey.
Hi, Maya. Thanks for having me.
And can we start with you telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I'm from Lincoln. I went to Nebraska Wesleyan University and studied political science and Spanish. I've been working with Nebraskans for Civic Reform for the past year and a half, and I focus a lot on our civic health work, which we get to talk about tonight, and some service learning projects with students in rural areas in Nebraska.
Great, great. Mm-hmm. Now, as I mentioned, you are currently Director of Operations and Special Programs with Nebraskans for Civic Reform. Can you tell us about your organization and its mission?
Absolutely. So Nebraskans for Civic Reform, NCR, our mission is to create a more modern and robust democracy for all Nebraskans. So that's really broad and a little bit lofty, and we like it that way because we get to do lots of different, really fun work. We've got three main programs that help us achieve that mission. We do lots of work with young people. Youth engagement and leadership development programs are a really big chunk of what we do. So we work with students to engage them during school, after school, outside of the classroom, with our civic process, with service learning, with a whole bunch of different things. Our theory and what we find is that students can make real cool impacts in their communities now, and if we help them kind of cultivate that culture of getting used to getting involved in their communities, they'll do it more and better in the future too. So that's one program area. The second is civic health, which we get to talk about more tonight. We look at communities based on a data-based approach. In that program area, we also do lots of work with neighborhoods. The One Omaha Neighborhood Initiative falls under that program area, and we've also done a lot of work with veterans in the past. The same kind of civic engagement, community engagement idea with all those three programs. And then our last area is nonpartisan voting rights advocacy. So my coworker, Bree McLarty, is our Director of Voting Rights, and she works on all kinds of different ways to make sure that our elections are modern and accessible and open to everybody in Nebraska.
Great, great. Now, when was Nebraskans for Civic Reform, when was that organization started?
So our Executive Director and founder, Adam Morfeld, started our organization in college, and a bunch of our board members are still original founding members, which is really cool. And that's where a lot of this drive for getting young people involved comes from too. It's a really cool history there. So we were officially incorporated as a nonprofit in 2011, and we've grown. We currently have about 30 full and part-time staff. We have offices in Lincoln, Omaha, and then programs out in Kearney too.
Okay, and then I understand too that you have some after-school programs. Where are they located at?
Yeah, we are the lead agency partner at Dawes Middle School in North Lincoln and Sherman Elementary School in North Omaha for their community learning center programs, their after-school programs. But we also offer clubs in 4 other middle schools here in Omaha.
Great. Now, one of the things your organization focuses on is civic health. Mm-hmm. What is civic health and how do you measure that?
Right, it's a term I had never heard before I worked for Nebraskans for Civic Reform. But we really like it. It's a way to gauge how invested folks are in their community and how active they are. I really like the term health. For civic health, we make a lot of connections between physical health, which is something people can identify really easily. We know that there are a lot of good benefits that come from physical health, and there are certain inputs that we can invest in to make sure that we have good physical health. You can exercise, you can sleep well, you can diet, all of those kinds of things. The same thing is true for civic health. So there are lots of really great benefits that come from civic health, and there are certain activities we can do to invest in that, like trusting our neighbors and getting to know them, like volunteering or donating to charitable organizations, like voting, like contacting our elected officials. All of those things kind of make up civic health.
Great, great. Now, why is civic health important to a community?
Yeah, so that's that benefit part, right? We talk about 3 main benefits that I like to talk about. One is that civic health leads to thriving and resilient economies. There are lots of studies that show that volunteering helps folks develop workforce skills, so make an individual more employable. A lot of community investment can lead to actual financial investment in hiring and spending within a community. So there are lots of connections between strong civic health and thriving and resilient economies. It's also pretty intuitive that if we're more participatory in our civic institutions, our government is more accountable and representative.
Right.
And that's a really good piece too. And then the third benefit that I like to talk about is high social capital and trust in our communities, and that makes our neighborhoods safer and healthier, and that leads to a lot of great benefits too. So those are just a few. Those are my favorites. So there are lots of good benefits to being civically engaged.
Right, okay. Now, my understanding is that Nebraskans for Civic Reform did their first ever civic health report for the state of Nebraska in 2015. And I know it contains a lot of interesting information, probably more than we would be able to talk about today.
Yeah.
Before we start talking about some of it though, where can our viewers access the report?
Sure. So the report's available on our website, nereform.org. /Nebraska Civic Health, if you want to get straight to it.
Okay.
But we've been really lucky to work with an awesome partnership on releasing the index too. So we know that civic health isn't something any one person can tackle on their own. It's not something that any one organization can tackle on their own either. So we've been really lucky to work with the UNL Center for Civic Engagement, the UNO Service Learning Academy, the Nebraska State Bar Foundation, the Nebraska Community Foundation, and the Nebraska Public Policy Center. And then we also have a national partner, the National Conference on Citizenship, which helps release these reports for states across the country.
Great, great.
Yeah.
Now, before you give us information about the results,
Yeah.
how are the rankings determined, or how do you judge in a given area how well Nebraskans are doing?
So there's this really cool survey that the Census Bureau puts out. And not too many people talk about the Census Bureau as being cool, but I think it's super cool. I think it's awesome. And so they do the current population survey, and that's what most of our data comes from, the current population survey. And they ask questions about all kinds of different indicators of civic health. Things from how often do people report eating dinner with members of their household to how often do people contact their elected officials, all kinds of things. And that's where this comes from. They collect the data across the country. And so we can break down and compare Nebraska to the other 50 states in the District of Columbia.
Got it, okay. Now to the good part.
The juicy
How are
stuff.
we doing more specifically? What are our areas of strength? What are Nebraska's good at as far as civic health?
Yeah, so I break civic health into 4 different categories. Social connectedness, which is a really clear strength in Nebraska. That's those indicators of how often do folks eat dinner with their families, eat dinner with members of their household. It's really, really strong in Nebraska. We rank 2nd in the country.
Okay,
and how often people say that. And it always makes me laugh a little bit, because what does that really mean? Does that mean that Nebraskans are good eaters and they generally like their families? And I think that's true. There's some truth to that. But it also means that we're really invested in those critical building blocks of a lot of different other civic engagement opportunities. That social connectedness piece means a lot in Nebraska, and we're really, really good at it.
Okay,
so that's
great.
the first piece. We also look at confidence in institutions, like our public schools, like corporations, like the media. That's really strong in Nebraska too. The third section of civic health is community engagement, things like volunteering, attending public meetings, donating to charities. We see Nebraska slip sort of to the middle of the road there. We're not top 10 anymore like we are with social connectedness and confidence in institutions, but we're definitely not bottom half. There's just room to grow. And that's really important, because those indicators of community engagement are huge investments in our community. In 2013, the value of an hour of volunteering in Nebraska was $23.07, I think. And that's the equivalent of what a financial investment in our community would be for volunteering for 1 hour. It's just a really huge investment that you can make. That's more than minimum wage. It's a big deal to invest that hour. So those are really big things that we can do in our community, and we've got room to grow there. The fourth section of civic health is political involvement. So we look at rates of registering to vote and actual voter participation, how often folks visit or contact their elected officials, and that's where we see Nebraska's national rankings slip to the bottom half. So we've got lots of work to do there to kind of mosey back on up to the top rankings that we see in other parts of our civic health.
Now, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit or touched on it, and I was kind of surprised that they said that Nebraskans have high confidence in like their schools, media, and corporations, and especially with all the negativity that's out there, I was kind of surprised to find that out. So Can you tell us more details about the findings, about why Nebraska, I guess what the report said is we seem to have a lot of confidence in our public institutions. So.
Yeah, so the question that's posed to folks by the Census Bureau on the phone is how much confidence do you have in your public schools to do what's right? And that's what folks answer, some, a great deal, not so much. And so Nebraskans say they have some or a great deal of confidence in, say, their public schools. That's in the 90 percentile as well, to do what is right. And that's a really cool statistic to see, since we all buy into all of those public institutions. I can break down some of the data a little bit farther, like by urban, suburban, rural. And one of the things we see specifically about confidence in institutions, specifically about confidence in public schools, is that our rates of confidence in our rural schools is out off the charts. It's like 95%. It's amazing. So our rural community members are really pulling us through there. But it's strong in urban and suburban Nebraska too. So it's a really exciting thing to see that we're all pretty proud of and trust in the institutions that serve us.
Right. Now, the one that I thought was interesting too was the one that said that we have high confidence in our corporations.
I know.
And in the report, it kind of alluded to that was kind of something different. So,
yeah.
What do you guys think? What's the reason why Nebraskans have a lot of confidence in their corporations?
I think it has probably a mix of things to do. It's all conjecture. I'm not totally sure. The data doesn't tell us exactly why people might trust the corporations, and I wish it did. Someday we'll develop a data set, but it could be lots of things. We've got lots of small business. We've got lots of Fortune 500 companies in the state. There's lots of good business going on in Nebraska.
That's what I remember the report saying, something about the fact that Nebraska has a lot of Fortune 500 corporations, that might be a reason why we have such a positive, how would I say, such confidence in corporations.
Exactly.
Okay.
That might be,
Now, another area that Nebraskans are doing well in compared to others in the country is our community engagement. And how is community engagement measured?
So those are those indicators like volunteering, which we can quantify in dollars sometimes, like charitable giving, which is definitely something that we can see by dollar signs. Things like attending public meetings. Those are all how we measure community engagement. And they're all pretty middle of the road. We're definitely above or top half. We're not in the bottom half. But we like to think that there's room to grow, especially since we have such strong building blocks, that there's room to grow there. Public meetings is one of my favorite statistics to pull out. Only something like 12% of Nebraskans attend public meetings. Really? There's a whole lot more Nebraskans out there who aren't, showing up at those very basic community levels and making their voices heard.
And you kind of touched on this a little bit before too. The report stated that Nebraska has the most concentrated area of deficiency in our political engagement. First, how is political engagement measured? And can you give us some details about what the report found, why we weren't doing so well in that area?
Right, that's our weakness. So we look at we can get exact rates of, from the 2012 election, all the voters in Nebraska that were registered, and all the voters who showed up and participated on registration day. And those rankings compared nationally are 32nd and 36th. And I always flip that. I think it was 32nd for voting and 36th for registration.
I remember they were down in the 30s.
Right. So we've got room to grow there for sure. Those are some examples of indicators for political involvement. We also look at how often folks contact their elected officials after Election Day. And that's more like 10% of Nebraskans show up there. What's really interesting and probably not surprising is that we see some of the more social aspects of political involvement, indicators like how often do you discuss politics with family and friends. That's stronger. We're more like 15th, right around that range, as we compare ourselves nationally. So it's not surprising because we know that social connectedness piece, if that's infused in our political involvement actions, then it's easier for us and it's something we're better at. So that's what we look at political involvement.
Now, the data obtained in the report, it says age and education play an important role in political engagement. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so those are a couple of the other ways we can break the data down. And we can look at by age, where folks are participating the most, and by education too. for a few of the indicators. And so what we see pretty consistently among just about every area of civic health is that the youngest Nebraskans report the lowest participation rates in just about every indicator, which means a lot of different things. Number one, that those voices aren't heard as often, especially in voting. It's very stark. 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds showed up in 2012. That's 60% that weren't there on election day. That's more than any other age group. But what we did do, because I'm a millennial, a lot of people I work with are millennials, and we're really engaged, and I have friends who are engaged, and so I wasn't quite so sure that the numbers were quite that stark. And so we also worked with the UNL Center for Civic Engagement and took a look at their civic engagement survey. And what we found was that on just about every indicator, except for voting, college students were outperforming definitely the data that we had for their age cohort across Nebraska, and often were meeting or exceeding our state averages in things like contacting elected officials, buying or boycotting something. Different indicators that where we see there's a struggle, college students were doing it well. So some of the things that we're thinking there is that younger folks are engaging in different ways than we've engaged before. And so on college campuses where they're inundated with opportunities to contact their elected official, where access is really obvious and apparent and expected and promoted, millennials, young people are doing that really, really well.
Great, great. Now, another concern raised in the report is that, and I'm kind of quoting from it specifically, is the need to not only increase participation among Nebraskans as a whole, but to specifically engage traditionally marginalized community members. So can you explain what that means and why that's important to do?
Yeah, so it hits on two things there. And one is that when NCR was founded, our mission is to create a more modern and robust democracy for all Nebraskans. And that requires a specific focus on folks who have been historically disadvantaged or disengaged. For us, that means a lot of times students, a lot of different, and this is a sweeping term, but minority groups. We work specifically with veterans who provide so much service to the country and then sometimes have trouble reconnecting. So those folks fall into our institutional, our organizational idea of disadvantaged and disengaged, and folks that really have skin in the game and whose voices should be heard. The other thing there is you found a limitation in our study. Our report can't be broken down by county level, so we can't look at specifically what communities are engaged and which ones aren't. Race, ethnicity isn't significant in our data. We can't break it down that far. So we assume that there are more trends that we haven't discovered based on our data set yet, and that we should be mindful of those moving forward.
Okay, great, great. Yeah. Now, in the report, or at the end of the report, the executive summary, it proposed 5 critical action steps that we can do to strengthen civic health in Nebraska. And I did want to go over some of those with you. Of the 5, the first one I wanted to start with was voter registration.
Sure.
What are some action steps that you guys are proposing in that area?
Yeah, so each of the action steps, and that was something that was really critical to ours and our partners' process in writing the report. We really wanted it to not live as just a report, even though I might love it. We really wanted it to be something that individuals and communities could take action on, and that could be relevant in real life. And so that was really important that we did that. We've got 5 different action steps. They all take a look at those different areas of civic engagement, of civic health, and dig into what we can do to be stronger. So the voting one is that we want to continue to work to increase voter participation by modernizing the process. And that's something that's pretty near and dear to NCR's heart. We've been long advocates of online voter registration, which is live as of a couple months ago, which is really exciting. So there's lots of really cool momentum in the state for things exactly like activating more Nebraskans to vote by modernizing the process. Our voter registration system hasn't quite kept up with how folks interact anymore. And so things like being able to register to vote online is a fantastic step to continuing to get more folks to engage in that way.
think I read in the report that you're looking maybe to see if we can like request early or absentee ballots online too, that would be a great step that we could
Those
add.
are some examples of other states, what they have done to modernize the process. Right now, we're really happy with
online,
where right with where we are now, and that's some really cool momentum that we can continue to build.
Okay, and now another one of the action steps was civic education. What are you looking to do in that area?
Yeah, so this is another really critical piece to NCR's heart, is our youth engagement programs. So civic education that leads to civic action for all students in Nebraska is really critical, especially because we really think that students have a big voice and a big chance to be decision makers and power brokers in their community as they are, as students, and that there's no better, safer place to practice things like civic engagement than at school, and then in a place where you're learning a whole lot about who you are and how to invest in your community. So things like our service learning programs, which we offer in Lincoln and Omaha and across the state, are great opportunities to invest in exactly those kinds of civic education models.
Great, great. Another area was creating, or one of the action steps was to create community engagement networks. What does that mean? Yeah,
so that's one of the pieces that we were talking about specifically with millennials getting engaged, younger folks getting engaged in our communities, that the public square isn't necessarily a physical place anymore. It's often online. Most of the research shows that young people, just as every other generation before, prefers to interact in person. They're really invested in in-person social capital, but the way to get them to show up at an event might be more online. And so that's what we're saying with networks, specifically with online social media, to connect community members to projects or to other opportunities to get involved, as the way to post opportunities in a community and maybe the online public square.
Now, Aaron, and now that you bring that up, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember reading in the report that they said that people actually prefer or are more likely to discuss political issues in person than online, and that went against what I thought would be true. Yeah. So you're saying that online is a good place to maybe announce a meeting, get together, but people prefer, it seems, to do that face to face. Is that what I'm getting from? Right.
That's what a lot of the research that we've read shows. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then another action area I remember seeing was, it says contact with elected officials and constituents. So can you tell us more about that area?
That's our indicator that only 10% of Nebraskans reported contacting or visiting their elected officials in a whole year. And that's just not buying into an accountable representative government. We've got a lot that happens after Election Day. And so if more than 10% of Nebraskans' voices are heard, those elected officials are more likely to be representative of what the state as a whole is interested in.
And so what ideals are you guys thinking of that would help to make that happen? Usually people are like, after they go vote, they're like, I'm done.
I'm done, yeah. I think one of the ways to do that is the same way. Folks are pretty in tune to action alerts on social media, on public information sites, and so that's another way to gauge interest in certain issues or feedback on certain steps that an elected official might be taking. Things like recording public meetings and posting them online that makes it more accessible for, say, families who have a second job and can't make it to a 6 o'clock evening meeting. Things like that that make it more accessible for folks to have the opportunity to engage with elected officials, maybe in a new way than's happened in the past.
And then the last one was connecting Nebraskans, and it was basically that we're strong there, but that we want to keep our strength up there. So what suggestions in that area to keep that going, or does it or just keep doing what we've been doing?
Keep doing what you're doing. And I think there's our state's growing and expanding, everywhere is growing and expanding. And so to continue to make that a priority and a tradition, no matter what our state looks like, to continue to invest in that really strong social connectedness that ties into all the other indicators of civic health.
Great, great. And I understand, and we talked a little bit about this before. I wanted to talk to you about the Civic Health Summit that you guys have planned for April. So can you tell us some more about that and what it involves?
Okay, we're so excited. Nebraskans for Civic Reform, NeighborWorks Lincoln, the UNL Center for Civic Engagement, and One Omaha are all working together to put on the first ever Civic Health Summit, April 2nd in Lincoln. It'll be at the Union in Lincoln, and we'll have a whole lot of attendee-driven action items to do. Will really help folks come up with ideas for how to promote civic engagement in their own communities. We'll have some fun speakers. The whole event is free. Register online on our website at nereform.org, and we'll provide lunch. So it'll be a really fun, cool day, April 2nd in Lincoln.
Great. And do you have any other plans coming up for the year besides the summit?
Lots of stuff. But one of the programs that came out of releasing the initial report was all of my data is really statewide. I've told you the couple ways I can break it down, but I can't do by specific community. And I think there's a lot of good in that, because folks who live in any community are the experts on their own civic health in that community. So we launched the Civic Health Ambassador Program. So people who are interested in what's going on with civic health in Nebraska and maybe can identify with some of the things we find in our report in their own community can sign up with me to be a Civic Health Ambassador. We'll support you in any way we can with data-backed ideas and with things like asset mapping projects to figure out where the strengths are in a community and maybe how you can use those strengths to tackle any civic health weaknesses you find, things like that. So we're continuing to build our ambassador program into this year, and that's just one thing that we've kind of got in the pike. Yeah.
Well, great. Sounds like you guys have a lot of good things going on. And just one last time, I wanted to, because we covered a lot of information.
Yeah.
And you said a lot of the information, the report and everything can be found at your website.
Yep.
And do you guys have a Facebook?
We've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram. My email's on there. Yeah, contact us any way that's comfortable.
Okay, well, great. Well, anything else that you think our viewers should know about civic health in Nebraska before we end today?
Well, thanks for giving us the chance to talk about it. And it's just a fun conversation to have and something we're really excited about seeing in lots of communities across Nebraska.
Great. Well, for the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha, my name is Maya Crawford-Gray, and reminding you to inform yourself about the issues, talk about them with others, and when election time comes around, to go vote Omaha.